In the heart of Ohio, a respected professor at a prestigious university seemed to have it all: a loving family, a successful career, and the admiration of students. But when a chilling secret came to light, everything changed. Behind closed doors, he had been living a double life, secretly manipulating and betraying those who trusted him the most. It was a crisp autumn morning in Ohio, the kind where the air was sharp and the scent of falling leaves mixed with the faint hint of earth. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when the news broke. The university, typically a quiet and prestigious institution nestled in the heart of the state, had been thrust into a scandal that would rock it to its core. The professor in question, Dr. Peter Donovan, had been a respected figure in the university's Department of History for over a decade. With his neatly combed hair and always pristine suit, he exuded an air of authority and intellect. His academic achievements were well regarded, and his lectures, delivered with passion and precision, had made him a favorite among students. To many, he was the epitome of professionalism, a man whose marriage to a fellow professor, Olivia Donovan, was admired by all. But all of that changed when an anonymous tip was received by the university administration. The tip described a hidden affair, one that spanned over several years, involving not just one, but multiple students. The news was shocking. Peter Donovan, the married professor who had seemingly built a life of respectability, was alleged to have engaged in sexual relationships with at least 15 of his students. The revelation sent ripples through the university, shattering the trust that had been placed in him by both students and faculty alike. As the investigation began, the true extent of the scandal came to light. The professor had not only used his position of power to exploit vulnerable students, but had also gone to great lengths to keep his actions secret. Hidden cameras in his office, encrypted communication devices, and secret meetings in the dead of night. These were just a few of the tactics he had employed to maintain the charade of innocence. It was a meticulously planned web of deceit, and for years it had remained undetected. The students who had been involved in the scandal were a mix of both men and women, each with their own reasons for becoming entangled in Dr. Donovan's manipulative grasp. Some were seeking academic success, others were lured by his charm, while a few were simply looking for validation. To them, he wasn't just a professor, he was a mentor, a confidant, and, for some, a lover. The relationships, while initially consensual, became increasingly exploitative as Dr. Donovan used his influence over them to fulfill his own desires. The power dynamic was always skewed in his favor, with the students unaware of the psychological manipulation they were being subjected to. As the media frenzy grew, so did the public outrage. The revelation that such a scandal could occur in an institution of higher learning was enough to shake the foundation of the community. Students rallied in protest, demanding justice for those who had been exploited. Faculty members, once supportive of Dr. Donovan's work, were now distancing themselves, horrified by the betrayal of trust. The university's administration was left scrambling, trying to contain the damage and protect its reputation. Behind the scenes, however, there were whispers of something much darker. Some of the students who had been involved in the affair had begun to speak out, but their voices were silenced by fear of retaliation from the powerful professor who still held influence over their academic futures, fear of the social stigma they would face, fear of the unknown consequences of their actions. For many of them, it was easier to stay silent, to hide the truth, rather than face the chaos that had already begun to unfold. But then, a shocking discovery turned the case into something far worse. One of the students, Sarah Miller, had gone missing. She was a quiet, intelligent young woman, one of the few who had not fallen under Dr. Donovan's spell. Sarah had been one of the first to report his actions to the authorities, and she had become a key figure in the investigation. Her disappearance, however, raised questions that no one had anticipated. Had she simply run away, overwhelmed by the public scrutiny, or had something far more sinister occurred? The authorities were quick to act, launching a full-scale investigation into her disappearance. But what they uncovered would send shockwaves through the entire state. In a secluded area near the outskirts of Ohio, police discovered a hidden cabin, one that had once belonged to Dr. Donovan's family. Inside, they found a gruesome scene. Sarah Miller's body, brutally murdered. She had been stabbed multiple times, her body left in a twisted and contorted position. There were signs of a struggle, and forensic evidence suggested that she had been held captive for days before her death. The discovery of Sarah's body marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. It was no longer just about a sexual scandal. It was about a murder, one that had been carried out with chilling precision. As the police dug deeper into Dr. Donovan's life, they uncovered a web of violence, manipulation, and deceit that had been hidden from the public eye. The professor's charming exterior had masked a much darker side, one that had been growing for years. Rumors began to surface that Dr. Donovan's marriage to Olivia had been on the brink of collapse for some time. His wife, who had once been his partner in both life and academia, had reportedly become suspicious of his behavior in recent months. She had discovered evidence of his infidelities, but it seemed that the professor had managed to cover his tracks well enough to avoid any confrontation. Olivia, who had once been a supportive and loving spouse, had now become a woman driven by anger and betrayal. She was determined to protect her reputation, but as the investigation into Sarah Miller's murder unfolded, her role in the professor's web of lies and manipulation came into question. In the days following Sarah's death, a series of strange events began to unfold. The university, still reeling from the scandal, found itself at the center of a media storm. The police investigation into Dr. Donovan's activities deepened, uncovering more evidence of his disturbing behavior, and behind closed doors, the professor's once carefully constructed life began to unravel. At this point, the truth was undeniable. Dr. Peter Donovan had not only destroyed the lives of countless students, but had also turned his own into a ticking time bomb. The quiet, respected professor had become the face of a nightmare that no one had seen coming. And as the story continued to unfold, no one knew just how far his descent into madness would take him. As the investigation into Sarah Miller's death unfolded, the police began piecing together Dr. Donovan's disturbing past. The hidden cabin where Sarah had been found was not the professor's first place of concealment. He had once used it as a retreat, a place where he could escape the pressures of academia and family life. But now it was a grim reminder of the depths to which his secrets had gone. In the days that followed, more evidence surfaced, and it painted a chilling picture of a man who had been living a double life for years. Dr. Donovan had carefully cultivated an image of an ideal professor. Intelligent, charismatic, and compassionate. But beneath this facade was a man whose desires had spiraled out of control. The more authorities delved into his life, the more they found that the professor had been harboring darker inclinations. His charm had made him popular among students, but it was his manipulative tactics that had kept them under his control. Witnesses came forward, each with their own stories about the professor's behavior. One former student, Jessica Taylor, spoke of how she had been drawn into an affair with Dr. Donovan under the guise of academic mentorship. At first, their meetings had been about her coursework, discussions on literature and history, but gradually the lines had blurred. He'd used his power as a professor to make her feel special, to give her the validation she craved. What had started as innocent tutoring sessions quickly spiraled into something more sinister. Jessica had become one of the many who had fallen prey to his manipulative tactics, unable to see the manipulation until it was too late. Are you enjoying the documentary? Stay tuned to this channel by hitting the subscribe button for more interesting, chilling crime stories. As Jessica told her story to the authorities, she described how Dr. Donovan had been well aware of his actions, even justifying them as part of his belief that he was simply helping students succeed. He had framed his sexual advances as a kind of academic necessity, a means to ensure their futures were secure. His words, always carefully chosen, convinced them that his affection was genuine, that he had their best interests at heart. But the truth, as the investigation revealed, was far darker than any of the students had realized. What they had interpreted as love or affection had merely been a tool for his own gratification, his desires masked as care. As the public began to digest the news, it became clear that Dr. Donovan's actions were not confined to a few incidents. This was a pattern that stretched back years, and Sarah Miller's death had finally revealed the depths of his depravity. What had once seemed like a mere affair between a professor and his students had now become a horrifying tale of manipulation, exploitation, and murder. The university, which had once prided itself on its rigorous academic standards, was now facing a crisis that threatened its very existence. The public's trust in the institution was eroding with each new revelation, and students who had once admired Dr. Donovan were now grappling with the truth. The media frenzy surrounding the case reached new heights as each new detail was revealed. News outlets from across the country descended upon Ohio, seeking to capitalize on the story that was quickly becoming a national scandal. The professor, who had once been seen as a pillar of the academic community, was now portrayed as a predator, hiding in plain sight. People wondered how such a respected figure could have concealed his actions for so long. How had his colleagues, his wife, and the administration not seen the signs? The answer, according to those closest to him, was simple. Dr. Donovan had been skilled in the art of deception. He knew how to hide his true nature, how to manipulate those around him, and how to maintain control. He had kept his personal life and professional life separate, and it was this separation that allowed him to lead a double life. While his marriage to Olivia had been strained, no one suspected the full extent of his infidelities, and though his students had looked up to him, none of them had seen the manipulation behind his charm. Olivia Donovan, Peter's wife, was left in a state of disbelief. The woman who had stood by her husband for years now found herself in the midst of a scandal that would change her life forever. Olivia had always been aware of her husband's demanding nature, his ambition, and his need for validation, but she had never imagined that his craving for power and control would extend into such an unspeakable realm. When the police found evidence that she had uncovered his affairs, it became clear that Olivia had been one of the few people who had begun to piece together the truth. Yet, she had remained silent, perhaps afraid of the consequences, or too caught up in her own denial. In the wake of the murder, Olivia's involvement became a subject of intense scrutiny. Did she know about her husband's actions? And if so, how much had she been aware of? Authorities were quick to investigate the possibility that she might have played a role in Sarah Miller's death. Though no direct evidence linked her to the murder, many speculated that she could have been complicit. As the investigation continued, the case only became murkier. Were Olivia's suspicions enough to drive her to take drastic measures? Or had she been completely unaware of the full scope of her husband's actions? As the days passed, the tension in the community mounted. The university held an emergency meeting to discuss the future of Dr. Donovan and how best to handle the fallout from the scandal. Students organized protests, demanding justice for those who had been exploited by the professor. The emotional toll on the students who had been involved in the affairs was palpable, with many of them grappling with feelings of shame, guilt, and confusion. The academic institution that had once felt like a safe haven was now a place of distrust and fear. Dr. Donovan, meanwhile, remained a subject of fascination for the public. As the investigation deepened, the authorities discovered more about his behavior, his need for control, his predatory tendencies, and his willingness to manipulate and deceive anyone in his path. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of all was the fact that his actions had been driven by an insatiable desire for power. The professor had not only destroyed the lives of those he had manipulated, but had also turned his own life into a ticking time bomb. His actions, ultimately, would not only result in the ruin of his career and reputation, but also in the loss of innocent lives. The full extent of the scandal was still unraveling, but one thing was clear: Ohio, and indeed the entire country, would never be the same. The reverberations of Dr. Donovan's actions would be felt for years to come as the academic world, the victims, and their families tried to rebuild what had been destroyed. As the weeks passed, the weight of the scandal settled heavily over the community, leaving a mark that would take years to erase. The stories of Dr. Donovan's crimes continued to echo across Ohio, with the ripple effects reaching far beyond the university campus. The press remained relentless, and more students came forward, revealing the full extent of the professor's manipulations. What had once seemed like an isolated set of incidents now appeared to be part of a much larger pattern of abuse. Dr. Donovan's reputation as a respected academic had been shattered. The once renowned professor had become a symbol of deceit. His actions a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in places where trust was supposed to be sacred. As investigators sifted through the professor's personal belongings and academic records, they uncovered more horrifying truths. His manipulations had not been limited to the students who had come forward. A closer look at his career revealed a pattern of emotional abuse that spanned his entire professional life. Many of Dr. Donovan's colleagues were left stunned by the revelations. Those who had worked closely with him struggled to reconcile the man they had known with the monster described in the testimonies. Some admitted that they had seen signs of his controlling nature, but had never imagined the extent of his behavior. Others expressed disbelief, struggling to understand how someone so highly regarded could harbor such dark tendencies. The university, which had prided itself on providing a safe learning environment, was left to pick up the pieces of a broken system. The authorities worked tirelessly to untangle the web of lies and manipulation that had been carefully spun over the years. Forensic experts examined the professor's communications, searching for any clues that might help explain his descent into madness. Among the evidence discovered were numerous emails, letters, and recordings in which Dr. Donovan had explicitly stated his need for control. It became apparent that his relationships with the students had never been about love or affection. They had been calculated moves in a much larger game of power. The professor's actions had not only destroyed the lives of the students involved, but had also taken a toll on the larger community. Parents of students who had attended the university expressed their anger and betrayal, and some even pulled their children from the institution, fearful that their own children could be vulnerable to similar exploitation. Trust, once easily given, was now something that needed to be earned. It became clear that the university would have to work hard to regain the faith of its students and their families. Amidst the chaos, Olivia Donovan found herself thrust into the spotlight. The wife of the man at the center of the scandal, she became an unwilling figurehead of the media frenzy. The public scrutinized every aspect of her life, wondering how much she knew about her husband's actions. In interviews with investigators, Olivia was adamant that she had been blindsided by the discovery of her husband's infidelity and manipulation. She claimed to have been unaware of the full extent of his actions, despite some of the incriminating evidence suggesting otherwise. Despite her claims of ignorance, Olivia's involvement in the investigation became increasingly suspicious. Several of Dr. Donovan's former students recalled seeing her at his office late at night, raising questions about her role in the professor's secretive activities. Was Olivia a victim in all of this, or had she been complicit in some way? It was a question that many were eager to answer, but no clear evidence emerged to support any definitive conclusions. Still, her presence in the investigation added yet another layer of complexity to the already tangled case. As the trial approached, the tension in the community continued to rise. The public, already shaken by the sheer magnitude of Dr. Donovan's crimes, demanded justice. The prosecutor's office worked tirelessly to prepare their case, ensuring that every piece of evidence was carefully examined and presented. They knew that the outcome of the trial would not only determine Dr. Donovan's fate, but would also send a powerful message to those who might consider exploiting their power in the future. The trial was set to begin in early fall. The media frenzy surrounding the case had only intensified, and Dr. Donovan's face was plastered across every major news outlet. His once charming demeanor now seemed like a cruel joke to those who had once trusted him. What had once been the face of a respected professor was now a symbol of betrayal and manipulation. Dr. Donovan was quickly becoming a pariah, and his every move was being closely watched. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The families of the victims sat in silence, their faces filled with grief and disbelief. Many had been reluctant to come forward, but the evidence had left them with no choice. As the trial progressed, the full extent of Dr. Donovan's actions was revealed in painstaking detail. The prosecution presented a damning case, outlining the professor's systematic abuse of power and manipulation of his students. Dr. Donovan's defense team struggled to mount a case in his favor. They argued that the relationships with the students had been consensual and that the professor had been a victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by those who wished to bring him down. They also claimed that the murder of Sarah Miller had been an unfortunate accident, a tragic outcome of an emotionally charged situation. However, the evidence was overwhelming. The professor's history of sexual abuse, his manipulative tactics, and the shocking murder of Sarah Miller painted a clear picture of a man who had crossed the line between power and depravity. As the trial neared its conclusion, the public continued to follow every twist and turn of the case. Dr. Donovan, once a respected academic, now stood as a cautionary tale. The students who had been manipulated by him, some of whom had been too ashamed to speak out, were now finding their voices. The verdict, when it came, was swift and final. Dr. Donovan was found guilty of multiple charges, including sexual assault, abuse of power, and the murder of Sarah Miller. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that seemed almost too lenient for a man who had caused so much pain and suffering. The university, reeling from the scandal, began the difficult process of rebuilding. A task force was created to review the institution's policies on sexual harassment and abuse of power, and new procedures were implemented to ensure that future students would be protected from similar exploitation. It was clear that Dr. Donovan's actions had shaken the very foundations of the academic community, and it would take years for the institution to regain the trust it had lost. For the victims of Dr. Donovan's manipulation, the road to healing would be long and difficult. Many would carry the scars of their experiences for the rest of their lives. The trauma they had endured could not be undone, but with time, some would find the strength to rebuild their lives. The case had sparked important conversations about the abuse of power in academic settings, and for many, it had served as a reminder of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most respected institutions. As the dust began to settle, the story of Dr. Donovan's crimes became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the lengths to which some individuals will go to manipulate and control others. The scars left behind would never fully heal, but the lessons learned from this tragedy would shape future generations, reminding them to question authority and to never ignore the signs of abuse, no matter how subtle they may seem. The story of Dr. Donovan's downfall would be told for years to come, a chilling reminder of the consequences that await those who choose to exploit the power entrusted to them. In the aftermath of Dr. Donovan's conviction, the quiet weight of the tragedy seemed to hang in the air, pervasive and unyielding. Ohio, and particularly the university that had been at the center of the scandal, faced a difficult journey ahead. The public and private spheres alike were affected. As the ripple effects continued to unfold, it was clear that the damage done could never be entirely undone, but time would tell whether the lessons learned from this horrifying ordeal could provide any hope for the future. The university's leadership, while publicly expressing shock and sorrow, found themselves on the defensive. Their initial response to the rumors surrounding Dr. Donovan's conduct had been slow and far too muted. Many critics within the academic community called for a complete overhaul of the institution's policies on student-teacher relationships. A task force was quickly formed to ensure that strict measures would be put in place, aimed at preventing future abuses of power. The pain felt by the community, from students to faculty, would not dissipate with a few policy changes, but it was a necessary step. Some students, particularly those who had once admired Dr. Donovan for his charm and intellect, found it impossible to reconcile the man they had known with the one who had committed such horrific acts. These students were forced to confront the fact that their idealized version of the professor had been nothing more than a mask. For many, the betrayal felt like a personal wound, and the hurt didn't just disappear with the end of the trial. It lingered in the corners of their minds and haunted their everyday lives. It was a trauma that no amount of policy reform could erase. For Sarah Miller's family, the trial marked a bittersweet end. While the conviction of Dr. Donovan brought some semblance of justice, it did little to heal the gaping hole left by their daughter's brutal death. Sarah had been a promising student, known for her ambition and determination, and her loss was felt deeply by all who knew her. Her parents, in particular, found themselves grappling with an unfathomable grief. Their child had been taken from them in a moment of senseless violence, and no amount of legal retribution could make up for that loss. But they took solace in knowing that her story had contributed to the eventual exposure of a darker reality, a reality that might help protect others in the future. As the months passed, survivors of Dr. Donovan's manipulations began to piece their lives back together. Some chose to leave the university, seeking to escape the shadow of the scandal. Others, however, remained, determined to take back their education and to heal. There were support groups set up in the wake of the professor's arrest, offering counseling and resources to those affected. But the emotional scars were far from easy to heal, and many found themselves struggling with feelings of shame, self-doubt, and a sense of powerlessness. Their trust had been shattered, and rebuilding it would take years, if not a lifetime. For Olivia Donovan, life had become an unbearable ordeal. Once the seemingly devoted wife of a respected academic, she found herself now living under a cloud of suspicion. Her every move was scrutinized, and many questioned her role in the affair. Although she had denied any complicity, the evidence left lingering questions. The fact that she had been married to Dr. Donovan during his years of manipulation and deceit painted a picture of a woman who may have turned a blind eye, if not actively participated in her husband's actions. Though she never faced formal charges, Olivia's life after the scandal was hardly recognizable. She had been left with no choice but to retreat from the public eye, isolated and alone. The media had painted her as a passive participant in her husband's crimes, and although there was no direct evidence that she had condoned or facilitated his actions, the public's perception of her had been forever tarnished. Meanwhile, the university's staff members were left to navigate the fallout of their association with Dr. Donovan. Colleagues who had worked alongside him now found themselves re-evaluating their own professional conduct. There was a palpable sense of distrust that hung in the halls, a feeling that would take time to shake off. Some faculty members expressed their disappointment in the lack of vigilance that allowed the professor's behavior to go unnoticed for so long. Others, however, struggled with feelings of guilt, questioning whether they had missed warning signs that could have prevented the scandal. The fallout from the case extended beyond the campus and into the larger community. Local news outlets, once saturated with details of Dr. Donovan's crimes, began shifting their focus to the broader issue of abuse of power in educational institutions. The case had ignited a public conversation about the ways in which authority figures, especially those in academic settings, could manipulate and control vulnerable individuals. The discussions ranged from policies that were put in place after the scandal to broader societal issues about power dynamics and consent. In the years that followed, many universities across the nation began re-evaluating their approach to sexual harassment and abuse of power. More stringent guidelines were introduced, and greater efforts were made to educate students about their rights and how to report misconduct. While these measures could never erase the scars left by cases like Dr. Donovan's, they offered a glimmer of hope that future generations would be protected from similar predatory behavior. As for Dr. Donovan, he spent his days in a prison cell, his once prominent name reduced to a mere footnote in the annals of criminal history. The man who had once been an influential figure in academia now found himself isolated from the world he had once controlled. Though he had been convicted of his crimes, the pain he had caused remained far beyond the confines of any prison wall. The families of the victims, the students whose lives he had ruined, and the academic community as a whole would never forget the impact of his actions. In the end, the story of Dr. Donovan's rise and fall serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of individuals in positions of power. The aftermath of the case leaves a trail of broken lives and shattered trust, but it also underscores the importance of vigilance and the need for institutions to protect their students. It's a stark reflection of the lengths to which some will go to conceal their true nature, and a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk behind the facade of authority. The legacy of Dr. Donovan's scandal will live on, not just in the memories of those who were affected, but in the reforms that followed, ensuring that future generations are not prey to the same type of exploitation. The wounds left by this tragedy may never fully heal, but the lessons learned from it will echo through time. How well do we truly know the people around us? The shocking truth about Dr. Donovan's dark secrets serves as a powerful reminder that even those we trust the most can harbor terrifying hidden lives. Want to stay on top of the most gripping true crime stories and uncover the dark secrets that lurk beneath the surface? Hit subscribe and join us for more shocking stories,